Right. Hello, everyone. We're gonna start our Bible study on the women of the Bible, the 12 women in the Bible, by looking at the story of Eve. We find the story in Genesis chapter 2 and 3. So maybe you can go to your Bibles and look at the first book of the Bible, second chapter 2 and 3, and have a look at the story of Eve, her creation, her temptation, her curse, and then her hope. So these are the four things we're going to be looking at today. Eve is a very special lady, a special woman because she is called Eve because she's the mother of all who live. So that was the name that Adam gave her. I'm going to be looking at her story and what her story tells us, and some of the principles that we can learn from her story. So as a way of introduction, just covering her story, we look at the story of creation. We know that God took about 6 days to create the world, and on the sixth day he creates the animals and all living beings and Adam. Then we hear about the story of Eve's creation. We know that God places them in the Garden of Eden, and that garden is a special place. It's a place where God meets with them, where God holds his counsel, where God, in a sense, has fellowship with them, and there is an amazing, wonderful atmosphere. God had given Adam a command. He said, and you can look it up in the beginning of chapter 2, when God says to Adam, Adam, you may eat from all the fruit of the trees in the garden. You can enjoy all of them, no restriction, have fun, enjoy it, except the tree of the knowledge between good and evil. If you eat from that fruit, you will die for sure. And after this command, God looks at Adam and says, well, it's not good for man to be alone. So he makes a decision to look for a right helper. That term in Hebrew, in the original language that the Bible was written, the Old Testament was written, simply means a continuation, an extension of someone. So God is looking around and is trying to find someone that is not just a companion to Adam. It's not just sort of someone to help him, but someone that continues him, someone that is in perfect union, perfect sort of a perfect relationship, an extension of Adam. And he creates all these animals and he brings them to Adam, and Adam gives them all names, but none of them seem to fit the bill. So then God puts Adam to sleep. And in that sleep, God removes a rib out of Adam, and from the rib, God makes the woman. And the Bible tells us that they were naked and unashamed. The Bible also tells us that the moment they are created, they enter into this marriage relationship where Adam and Eve are called man and wife. And so the amazing thing is, and what I want you to notice from the first instant is this detail, that Eve, the way God created Eve, is absolutely special. So let's look at the way she was created. The reason why this is special, it's because it's unique in all of creation. So for example, if you look at chapter 1 and the way God created everything, God created the planets, the stars, vegetation, animals, all these things out of nothing. God just spoke and things came into existence. That's the ability of God to create. He's the creator, so he can speak things into existence out of nothing. Then when God comes to the creation of man, of Adam, God takes the dust from the ground that he already created, makes a shape, and then he breathes into that body, and Adam then becomes a living being. So the breath of God makes Adam alive. Now, Eve's creation is completely different, because this is the first time that God uses the tissue of another person to create somebody else. So God takes the rib out of Adam, the first precision surgery in the history of humanity, takes the rib out, closes Adam back up, and then God uses that bone tissue, that flesh tissue, to create Eve. It's a unique creation. The way she's created shows us that from the very beginning, Eve is on equal footing with Adam. Some commentators say, she wasn't created from a brain cell. She wasn't created from his foot. She wasn't created from a hip bone or any other place. She was created from the rib, very close to his heart. And that gives me that wonderful sense of Adam and Eve are now equal partners in God's inheritance. God goes to both of them and says, I want you to be blessed. I want you to multiply. I want you to take dominion over the earth. And that's the amazing thing about the fact that God gives them both this inheritance. It is only later, when sin comes into play, that there is this nasty competition between sexes. Before the fall, before sin came and affected their relationship with God, their relationship with nature, and their relationship with one another, we see this amazing equality between Adam and his wife Eve. Now, we can talk a lot more about that, but one thing I want you to understand, that when Jesus died on the cross, he removed the curse of that competition, and therefore there is a verse in Galatians that says, now because of Jesus, there's no more separation. There's no more Greeks, no more Jews, no more male, no more female. In other words, Jesus has come to remove the curse of our sin. And so what we want in Jesus is to understand that man is not above woman, the woman is not above man, but we are equal partners of the inheritance that Jesus has given us. So in the new creation, in heaven, God is going to return us to that initial design, initial creation, where man and woman are equal partners of God's inheritance. It is sin that destroyed that beautiful union. Because in a sense, the second thing I want you to see in Eve's creation, not only that she's an equal partner with Adam, but she's in complete unity with Adam. She enjoys this amazing partnership with Adam. She is a continuation of Adam. In a sense, this unity is so perfect that you don't know where Adam starts and where Eve finishes. It's a little bit like when you're married for such a long time, you don't even have to say things that you know so well. You know each other so well that you can even read your mind. You can know what you're thinking. You know what you're feeling. There is that perfect unity. And Eve is a great picture of that unity. That wonderful relationship with Adam. So we can look at her creation, we can conclude that her creation, although unique, has brought us a sense of what it means to be in equality with man, in unity with man, and in a wonderful, beautiful relationship with man. Because as I said to you, if you read the story, you'll find that both of them are naked and they are not ashamed. They are not, they're just, they know they're naked, but they find no shame in it. And that that requires a great amount of trust, and you see how that relationship is absolutely vital. So her creation, unique, absolutely amazing. You know, if we're trying to kind of think of what, in a sense, perfection would look like, we just have to go to Eve's story. But it's also sad because what follows is her temptation. And so in the story of Eve, we find her in chapter 3. You go to chapter 3, you'll find that there in the garden, there is this person. Most Bible translate that as a serpent. The word serpent can also be translated as the shiny one. And so we know by now that it's the devil. The devil comes, has a conversation with Eve, and it is my opinion that he did not come in the form of a snake, although the text appears to say that. He came in all his glory. The shiny one that is compared to a snake in terms of shrewdness, in terms of deceitfulness, in terms of the slickness of the whole character of Satan. We know that by this time he has fallen. He wanted to be like God, and because he was just a cherub, a created being, God threw him out of heaven, but he still has access to the Garden of Eden. He comes, has a conversation with Eve. Eve doesn't seem to be surprised by this conversation, which gives me a sense that it's not, seeing him in Eden is not a sort of a surprise to her. She's used to having him around. We can talk more about that some other time, but for the sake of Eve's story, we find him coming to Eve and planting the doubt. Did God really say this? Now, let me say from the start that the devil hasn't changed his tactics. If he can cause us to doubt what God said, then we become a lot more vulnerable. So we need to be so grounded on what God says and knowing what God says that when the devil comes to tempt us, we can reply like Jesus said, "It is written." And so the devil comes and says, did God really say that you should not eat from the fruit of any of the trees in the garden? And it's fascinating because Eve says, of course we can eat from the trees in the garden. It's only the fruit from the tree in the middle of the garden that we're not allowed to eat. Then if you look very carefully at verse 3, Eve does something that is very interesting. She adds to what God says. Whether it was her own addition or whether it was Adam trying to protect her, God said, do not eat from the fruit. But what Eve says is, God said we should not eat or even touch the fruit. So what is fascinating here in the story of Eve is the fact that she gets what God says, but she adds to what God says. So and this is an amazing and very important lesson from the story of Eve. It's important to know what God says, but we should not add or take from what God says. The moment we add or take away from what God says, we become very vulnerable to doubt, very vulnerable to, I wonder if I got this right. I can't really remember. And so immediately, because she adds to what God says, the devil goes for it and says, surely you will not die. You will be like God. And in a sense, the devil seems to convince her that somehow God is trying to restrict them. And Eve falls for it. Now, here is a problem. They were already created in the image of God. They were already God's imagers. They were already made in his image. So there was no more need for them to want to be like God, because they were already created in the image of God. But you see, what the devil is doing here is transferring his own desires to be like God on man, on Eve. And he falls for it. And the way she falls for it is this very interesting sequence of events, because, and again, I want you to understand that there's nothing new. She looks at the fruit. She sees that it's desirable. She looks at it. She wants it. She takes it, and then she gives it to Adam. So this is how sin works. She saw, she wanted, she took, she gave. And from that moment, everything goes downhill. She takes from the fruit, disobeys God. She gives it to Adam. Adam is right there beside her. And he's so dumb. Instead of stopping her, he just goes for it. And then the first thing that she realizes the moment she disobeys God is a complete change in the perception of self. She sees she's naked and she's ashamed. Adam sees he's naked and he's ashamed. Friends, the greatest lesson from Eve's story is this. Sin not only brings death into your life, spiritual death, separation from God, as well as physical death, but sin will distort your perception of who you are. Immediately, Eve begins to feel ashamed about her own body. Now think about that. What's the greatest challenge we have in today's world? The way we see ourselves, the way we see our bodies. We're never happy. God created her perfect. So perfect that whenever Adam sees her, he has nothing else to say but, ah. We used to have a joke whenever I learned Hebrew. We used to have a joke. The Hebrew word for man is ish. The Hebrew word for woman is isha. So we made a little joke that Adam couldn't say a word. He was so absolutely struck with awe that he couldn't say anything else but ah. All that is gone now. She looks at herself and she's ashamed. That's what sin does. Sin changes our perception. And so the moment they realize they are naked, they try to hide. It doesn't work. God knows where they are. God comes and says, why are you hiding? Who told you you're naked? And so Adam confesses, and the blame game starts. Adam says, well, God, it was the woman you gave me. Eve says, oh, it was the serpent. And it's interesting that Adam kind of blames God. God, if you hadn't given me a woman, I would have been absolutely, completely happy. Nonsense. Sin has a way of causing us to be ashamed, feel guilty, and we feel this constant and natural, it's instinctual need to cover ourselves or to blame others. And immediately God makes them aware of the consequences of their sin. There are two consequences when it comes to Eve in this story. God says to Eve, Eve, you will have great pain in giving birth. I'm told, I'm not a woman, I've seen Michelle giving birth 3 times, and I could never imagine the pain. That's what it comes from. The second consequence to sin was you will be in competition with your husband. You will have a natural tendency to rule over him, and he will rule over you. All of a sudden, the beautiful picture of unity, equality, relationship is destroyed now. Men and women are starting this constant competition, this constant desire to overpower, overrule, and that's nonsense. This is where it starts. But not all is lost, because there is hope. So we looked at her creation, we looked at her temptation, we looked at her curse and the consequences of her sin. Now let me look at her hope. There is a beautiful verse in chapter 3, and that is verse 15, and it's part of the curse that God puts on the serpent, on the devil. And in verse 15 it says, "And I will cause hostility between you," that's the devil, "and the woman, between your offspring and her offspring. And he will strike your head, and you will strike his heel." This is the first mention of the Messiah. And the hope of all who come after Eve, that one day Eve's seed, Jesus, the Messiah, will crush Satan's head, and Satan will bruise his heel. That's the first mentioning of God's plan of salvation, the cross and the bruising of Jesus. So there is a beautiful parallel here with Mary. We're going to talk later about Mary and how all Eve's hopes and dreams, all her repentance and all her desire to go back to that beautiful unity, equality, and relationship she enjoyed with Adam in the Garden of Eden is now fulfilled in Mary. Jesus comes and dies for our sins, and he dies for the curse of our sin. And one day, all that relationship, equality, and beautiful unity will be restored in Jesus. So there is hope. So what have we learned about Eve? I know that you will be discussing this with Michelle later on, and you will probably want to have some questions and more details. But in her story, look at these four things. The way she was created, what an amazing, perfect, beautiful human being. Eve, a unique way of creating Eve. Adam calls her Isha. After the fall, just at the end of chapter 3, verse 20, "Then the man Adam named his wife Eve, because she would be the mother of all who live. And the Lord made clothing from animal skins for Adam and his wife." So she gets the name Eve after the fall. She is equal with Adam. She's in amazing unity with Adam. She's in a wonderful relationship with Adam. But she gets tempted. She falls for the deception of the devil. And her sin has consequences, just as Adam's sin. I don't believe that in the story we can blame Eve or Adam. I think together they made a decision that dishonored God, and now we bear the consequences of their decision. There's pain in childbirth. There's this constant desire to compete with her husband, to overcome and rule over her husband, but the husband is going to manage to rule her, and this is not going to be dealt with until we all submit to Jesus. The hope of Eve. So let's end up on a very positive note. There is hope. There is forgiveness. There is joy coming later on with Mary and the birth of Jesus. So there are some amazing lessons we can learn from Eve. Remember that you were made in God's image. Remember, what destroyed that image, what distorts your perspective of who you are, is sin. The only way you can restore God's image in you, the only way you can restore your own perspective of who you are, of how you look like, of your own body, is by coming to Jesus. He is our hope. Sin destroys and gives your own perception. Jesus gives you a correct perception of who you are and how God created you to be. So, look at the story of Eve. Have a look at the questions that are on the paper, and have a discussion about these four things: her creation, her temptation, her curse, and her hope. I hope this was useful and you've learned some really beautiful things. God bless you. Take care.